Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to the 2008 Nebula award-winning novel, Ursula Le Guin's Powers. So what I would like to do, as always, is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I talk to what I liked and what I didn't like. I'll make some recommendations based on similar novels that we've read and ranked on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder so far. We'll put this one to the memory test and we'll go and rank it and see exactly where it lands on our board. So this is the third novel in Ursula Le Guin's The Western Shore trilogy, and I believe the novels can be read independently of each other. I don't think you'll necessarily miss out on anything by not reading the first two novels. It's definitely not been my experience. I've enjoyed reading this particular novel, Powers, as a standalone novel, and it hasn't really affected my enjoyment of it, but I guess do keep that in mind. We're introduced to this young boy called Gavin, and he's a slave in the house of Senator Alton Archer. And it's rather interesting, this world that Ursula Le Guin has constructed here for our enjoyment, because it is a slave master system, but the slaves in this particular household are not mistreated like they are outside of this particular household. And we learned that, he was taken early, Gavin was, with his sister Sallow, when they were little kids from these marshlands. And what we learned is that Gavin is a pretty bright individual. He, in this particular slave household, they're encouraged to learn, both slaves and masters alike, their children. So he's pretty gifted. He's actually really gifted and doing quite well at school. And that's probably largely to do with the fact that he has these powers, and his particular powers is he's got this that can only be described as photographic memory, and also this prescient sort of thing that he can sort of see future events, well, and he calls them rememberings. So he's not quite sure if these are things that he's remembered or things that he foresees, but with time we learn that these are actually prescient sort of sightings that he gets. But he's been warned by his sister Sallow to keep this secret and never to let any of the masters know, and to literally not let anyone know of his particular powers. And she's sort of, she's a little bit older than he is, and she tells him that that's not uncommon in these marshmallows, I was going to call them, these marshland, maybe that's saying something about my appetite at the moment. Wouldn't mind a roasted marshmallow. But anyway, his sister Sallow is basically telling him that these powers are not uncommon in the people of the marshlands. So after a pretty traumatic experience happens, we find that Gavin is so overcome with grief that he just walks in a trance almost, just walks out of town and he continues walking. I got glimpses of that scene in Forrest Gump when Forrest just starts running and just continues running. Something similar sort of happens to Gavin here, but in his grief he starts walking and he finds himself now too far away, and he's now considered a runaway slave. And it really is a journey of discovery here. It's a journey of what it means to be, a slave, and what it means to have free will, and what it really means to be a free person. And we learn through this as Gavin journeys through the landscape, trying to understand his past so he could understand his future. And what a wonderful, wonderful ending to a wonderful novel this was. A true highlight. So what is there to like in Ursula Le Guin's Powers? And for me, it's got to be that emotional hero's journey. It's a classic, right? This is one of those classic hero journey novels, coming of age novels, and it's told through the eyes of this young Gavin, this young slave boy, and you can't help but get emotionally attached to Gavin as you suffer through his losses, and you mourn as he mourns, and you cry as he cries, and you celebrate his successes, and you want nothing the best for him. It's just a story that draws you in, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the novel. I think it just beautifully written, which will come down straight into my second point. But it's a wonderful hero's journey, right? And characters and the world setting just keep you immersed in this, and it just feels so relatable. It's just wonderful storytelling in this one. And I'll couple that with Ursula Le Guin's writing. Now, this one's an interesting one, and we might come back to that when I talk to some of my dislikes. But I kept reading through this novel, and I'll come back to that again with my memory test. But as I was reading through this novel, I just kept thinking, this is really interesting writing. It's both in its cadence, in its ebbs and flows. It just propels the plot along. And as I was reading, I was thinking, what's with the language used here? It's just really fascinating. It's a really well-written novel. I highly recommend it just purely on that. But as you read it, you find that the cadence, it's just written in a way that sort of has you, be still in those moments of stillness and move in those action scenes, right? And not that there's a whole lot of them, mind you, but it just keeps you immersed, right? Even with the writing, the cadence sort of talked to me in this one. It sort of brought me along and made me enjoy the novel. It is a bit of a slow burn, and it's slow going, and similar novels that we read on the board, like Connie Willis's novels, some of these novels just make you want to read purely for the writings, you know, for the sake of reading because of the wonderful writing. And I'm going to have to put this one in the same bundle. I really did enjoy the writing. It's not like what we found in previous novels that we've covered on the board by Ursula Le Guin, except perhaps for the Earthsea Quartet, and we'll come back to that with the recommendations. But I found the pacing in this one really interesting. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The other thing that I've got to mention is the themes. Now, Ursula Le Guin does a wonderful job of incorporating these really philosophical stories, philosophical ideas in her novels, and questioning, you know, what it means to really be free, what it means to have power. We saw some of those themes covered in The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. So again, I really enjoyed that. And she paints it in a way that she just asks the question. She doesn't try to say this is what power looks like, or this is what innocence looks like, or this is what freedom looks like. She tells the story, and you're free to make up your own mind and question. And I really enjoy that in novels, and this was definitely no exception. So what is there not to like in a novel that, if it's not obvious enough, I really enjoyed? And for me, this one, I'm going to go back to the pacing. Like, I really enjoyed it, right? Sometimes I really enjoy reading a book, and there's a couple of authors like that, like Ursula, like Connie Willis, that make me want to read just purely for the reading's sake. But that's not for everyone. And I know there are readers out there that just want to get involved in a really quick moving plot, or really interesting plot with twists and turns. And I'm going to have to say, this is not that novel, right? This is a really slow burn. And honestly, a lot of the time I was asking myself, okay, I'm enjoying this. I'm actually loving it. I think it's fantastic. But where are we going with this? What's this journey about? I had similar kind of conversations about The Left Hand of Darkness when those two protagonists went on that journey. And I thought so much of it was just about the journey and not the destination, right? And that's somehow very similar in this particular novel here. I think the destination is awesome. I love the way this novel ended. But it is that kind of novel that it is about the journey. And that may turn some people off. You may be wanting to see more twists and turns. You may want to see more, conflict within the novel. Not that there's not conflict. I think there's plenty of conflict. But I think you understand what I'm getting at, right? There's twists and turns in the plot that keep you engaged. And I don't think that is the necessarily will be everyone's experience in this. It was definitely not mine, but like I said, I'll put that in my like section. I sometimes like those slow burns. So I guess it's a bit of a caveat for you. Be warned, if those slow rolling novels get to you, this may not be one for you. The other thing I want to mention is that this novel is marketed as a young adult novel. And I'm not quite sure if that worked for me. As an adult reading through this, I just didn't see a whole lot of young adult themes in this. And I didn't read like a young adult novel for me as well. And I'm not quite sure how well it would appeal to a young adult. So if you are a young adult, I'd love to hear your opinions of it down below. Because I don't know, it's a 500-page novel. And I don't know if I would recommend this one to a young adult reader to say, look, have a go at this, you're going to love it. Because it is a bit slow going. And I think some of the themes are not necessarily what I think would appeal to a young adult. I may be completely wrong. I'd love to hear your comments on that. But I'm going to put it in my dislikes because it didn't quite resonate with me. The other thing I'm going to definitely have to say is I felt at times like this novel was a book about lost opportunities and wasted chances. It had wonderful characters. I thought it had a very good premise with these powers that young Gavin had, but I felt like they were never really explored or exploited as part of the plot. It left me a little bit flat. I honestly wish it would have been explored a little bit more, taken more into the realms of what we found with the Earthsea Quartet, because I think it would have made it for a more interesting novel, and one that I think you could then safely market to a young adult audience, and I would absolutely love it. So I just saw I would have to complete my dislike sections with that. I think it was a bit of lost opportunity and wasted chances here, but otherwise a wonderful novel. So can I still recommend this one? And I would have to say 100% yes. I read this and I remember reading it first time it came out It would have been around 2010, so a good 15 years ago. And I remember reading this when I learned that it won the Nebula Award, having been a fan of The Dispossessed and Left Hand of Darkness, and Ursula Le Guin generally, especially the Earthsea Quartet. I was really looking forward to this. And one of the things I remembered clearly is that, yeah, this slow roll is worth it. And for that, I would highly recommend it, right? It's got a wonderful ending, this one. I just love the ending of this novel. It just perfect. I just loved it. And so I highly recommend it. I'd say definitely have a go. If you've enjoyed Ursula Le Guin's other novels, I'd say definitely have a go at this one. But before I make similar recommendations, I want to go back to the memory test. So I mentioned I read this back in 2010, and I do remember loving the ending. But honestly, there's not much else I could recall in this one, even though it's only been about 15 years or so since I last read Ursula Le Guin's Powers, because the plot is a bit slow going, and it's a journey, and the journey sometimes is not as memorable as the destination, right? If we take back that to a literary sense, right? Like when you're going on a journey, yeah, sure, you may remember, you might recall some of the scenery or some of the things, some of the conversations you had, it might be fun memories, but what you ultimately really remember is that destination. And that was my experience with this one. I remember the ending, I really enjoyed the ending, but a lot of the journey, I got glimpses of, oh yeah, I remember this and I remember that, but the overall journey, I'd have to say, definitely did not meet the memory test as far as my likings go. But yes, highly recommend it. But what else could I recommend? Now, I've got here Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. If you haven't read The Left Hand of Darkness, you 100% need to read it, because this is just a classic, as the title would suggest, a classic of science fiction. You ought to read it. I've documented and reviewed this novel in the past, so I won't talk too much about it. Please watch the video down below if it interests you. But that's an absolute classic, as is The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. Both cover very similar themes, right? What it means to be free, what it means to have power, what it means to be male or female. You know, what does it actually mean to be a human? What does it mean to be an anarchist or any other political system, right? It just asks you those questions in a typical, wonderful Ursula Le Guin way that, you know, gives you some facts and allows you to explore and question. And these two novels are absolute classics for that. The other one that is probably my favorite of the Hugo and or Nebula award-winning novels that Ursula Le Guin has released will be Tehanu, which is the fourth book in the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula Le Guin. And this is another absolutely classic fantasy novel. I love this one. And so many times reading Powers, it did take me back to the Earthsea Quartet. There's definitely a lot of similarities into two novels. I'd say this one, it doesn't go as philosophical as we find in the young adult novel that is Powers, but it still goes places that are just absolutely wonderful. Couple that with just beautiful writing, and the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula Le Guin is an absolute must-read novel. If you've enjoyed any of these three novels that I've just talked to, I think you will 100% enjoy Powers, and vice versa. We've got to rank it on our ever-growing Sci-Fi Shed ladder. Let's see exactly where this one lands. So we're back to the Sci-Fi Shed ladder to take a look at today's 2008 Nebula award-winning novel, Powers by Ursula Le Guin. And I'm looking at the A side of the board here because when I've applied my full criteria that I've documented below, I don't think it's going to be anywhere but the A side of the board. Because when I look at the concept, I gave it really good marks for the concept. I thought it was an interesting concept with this boy with these really interesting powers, and he's a slave boy learning to understand what it means to be human and what it means to be free. And I thought the concept was just beautifully done. I took some points away when it comes to execution, because I did say in my dislikes that I thought it was a bit of a wasted opportunity, given the wonderful powers and how interesting these characters were, that we didn't explore them a little bit more. So I got a couple of points deducted because of the execution. But when it comes to the writing and the characters and the ending, it got full marks. I just loved the characters. The ending I thought was just perfect. I just loved the ending, put a really big smile on my face. And the writing was just really well suited for this kind of story. So again, I'm going to have to say we're definitely looking at the A side of the board. And maybe a good place to start would be Tehanu by Ursula Le Guin herself. But when I look at Tehanu, that was just a beautiful novel. Again, really interesting characters, but I thought it was more that fantasy sort of flavor came out more in Tahanu. I mean, the main protagonist in there, that wizard and his journey. And then, you know, looking at Tahanu, that young girl, and her disfigurement, and just what it meant, again, to be human and to be free and to be powerful. Earthsea Quartet is just a must read, right? So I couldn't see Powers and the Western Shore trilogy really being the better of the series. So I'm definitely not going to be looking at replacing Tahanu there on the board. And when we look at The Dispossessed and The Left Hand of Darkness, again, two wonderful novels. But these, again, went places that are a lot more philosophical than what we saw in Powers. They asked, I think, a lot more questions, and a lot more, what I would say, literary fiction than they almost are science fiction. They really do ask some interesting questions, some hard questions at times. And it's just wonderfully written that, again, I'm not going to say that Powers is going to challenge these wonderful novels. So I think we're looking towards the bottom side of the A board here, or the A side. And we got Flowers for Algernon. I mean, that's bottoming out. I don't know. Flowers is such a good novel. Sometimes I still question myself as to why it's ranking there. But I've mentioned it so many times. It's because this, I think, is just a beautiful piece of literature, not necessarily science fiction, and hence why it got some marks deducted, because it's really not science fiction for me. There's just not enough science fiction, at least. So we're looking at this side of the board, and we've got Red Mars and the Free Body Problem. And I think, and the Parable of Talents. Parable of Talents, again, is a really interesting one. But I've made up my mind. I'm going to give it to Ursula over the Parable of Talents on the A side of the board as a fantastic way to finish our experience with Ursula Le Guin on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder. For all Hugo and or Nebula award-winning novels, all of them residing on the A side of the board, which is really no surprise given that she's been a favourite of mine for many, many years now. So there we have it. Have you read the other novels in the Western Shore? I haven't, and it hasn't really taken away from my enjoyment of this one. What's your experience? Have you read the others? Would you recommend reading them in order? I'd love to hear your opinions. Have you read the other Ursula Le Guin novels if you've enjoyed Powers? What do you think about my ranking of these wonderful novels? Do you agree? Do you think there were other Ursula Le Guin novels out there that should have won a Hugo and or a Nebula and are not? I haven't. But you would highly recommend over these? I'd love to hear from you, because Ursula is one of my favorites when it comes to science fiction authors. Hey, I've been Peter, this has been The Shed, and I'll see you next time in The Shed.